They say revenge is best served cold. But that night I served it warm, with candlelight, wine, and a smile my wife never forgot. My name is James Thornton, and I once believed love could cure everything, loneliness, fear, even betrayal. I was wrong. For 15 years, Emily was my entire world. She was young, beautiful, ambitious, and dangerously good at pretending. I built her a life most people only dream of. A mansion by the lake, a garden she loved, a future that glittered with promises. But every fairy tale ends when one person starts writing their own secret chapter. It began with late-night phone calls. Then the perfume that wasn't hers on my shirts when she hugged me goodbye. And finally, the message I wasn't meant to see, a single text flashing on her phone while she showered. He's clueless. See you at the usual place tonight, Redheart. I remember the sound of my heartbeat that night, steady, quiet, dangerous. I didn't confront her. I watched. I studied. Because confrontation ends the game, observation controls it. For weeks, I followed her routine. Morning yoga, charity meetings, lunch with friends. But twice a week, she disappeared for exactly 2 hours. So one Thursday I followed her. She drove to the Ridgeway Hotel, room 307. I waited outside for 2 hours, counting every lie she told me. When she finally stepped out, hair tousled and cheeks flushed, I saw him, Ethan Reed, my company's marketing director. My employee. That moment, the world didn't break, it crystallized. Everything became sharp, clear, and cold. I smiled as they drove off together. That night, while Emily slept beside me, I whispered quietly, "Enjoy it, my love. Because I'm preparing our final dinner." The next few weeks were strangely peaceful. I acted like nothing had changed. Kisses at breakfast, flowers on Fridays, laughter at dinner. But beneath the surface, I was planning. Revenge, to me, was not about rage. It was about art. And art requires patience. First, I made Ethan indispensable at work. Promoted him. Praised him. Gave him access to confidential data. Every step brought him closer to a trap I was building quietly, one digital brick at a time. Second, I gave Emily everything she wanted. Jewelry. Vacations. Freedom. I wanted her comfortable, blind to the storm coming her way. Then one night, I sent 2 invitations. One to Emily. One to Ethan. Both read. Dinner at 8. Formal. A surprise announcement. They had no idea the surprise was them. That day, the lake looked like glass. The mansion glowed under golden light. The dining table was set for 3, candles, wine, and her favorite dish, rosemary lamb. When Emily came down, she looked breathtaking, emerald dress, soft perfume. "You're smiling," she said. "What's the occasion?" "A celebration," I replied. "Of honesty." She didn't understand then. At exactly 8 p.m., the doorbell rang. Ethan stepped in, confused but smiling, expecting a friendly dinner. Emily froze. Their eyes met, then turned to me. I poured wine, calm as ever. "Emily," I said gently, "why don't you tell Ethan what we're celebrating?" Her face went pale. Ethan shifted uncomfortably. "James, I think there's been a misunderstanding." "No misunderstanding," I interrupted, still smiling. "Tonight's about truth." I slid my phone onto the table. One tap, and the projector behind me lit up. A series of images flickered, Emily and Ethan, together, in that hotel room. The silence that followed was heavier than thunder. "James, please," Emily whispered. "Please what?" I asked softly. "Forgive you? Forget?" I raised my glass. "To love," I said. "And to endings." They sat frozen, unsure whether to run or speak. That's when I smiled again, the same gentle smile I gave the day we married, and said, "Dinner's served." When the projector clicked on and the images began to play, something in Emily snapped, as if a delicate glass inside her skull finally fractured. Ethan tried to speak. She tried to run. I let them both flounder in those first stunned seconds. I let the silence thicken like cream. That silence was not empty. It was full of everything they'd stolen from me. Time, trust, pride, sleep, the steady pulse of a household that no longer belonged to me alone. I remember the way Ethan shifted on the chair, the guilty little ways of a younger man who thought charm could smooth over consequence. He was the type who believed in quick fixes, smiles, excuses, plausible deniability. He was good at presentations. He was terrible at long games. "You have some nerve," Emily whispered. Her voice was small. For the first time in years, her composure failed her. I smiled the smile I'd rehearsed in the mirror for weeks. "Emily, the nerve was yours." She groped for the wineglass I'd poured and drank as if the liquid could steady her. Ethan sat, pale, and stared at the screen, where the hotel photo, room 307, played again. Then new images, messages, a bank transfer screenshot, an email draft of a resignation that had never been sent. I had everything. I had it all in a sequence that told their story better than any confession ever could. You should know how I built this. I didn't stumble onto any single piece of evidence by luck. I engineered every thread they'd used to cover their steps, and then I loosened the knots one by one. First, the cameras. Not in their bedroom. God knows I had no right to that kind of invasion, but in the periphery, the driveway, the hotel entrance, the office lobby. A discreet maintenance contractor I'd long trusted had installed a security enhancement for me 3 months earlier. He owed me a favor. He provided me with footage, unremarkable at first glance, but the timing of arrivals and departures was a map. Second, access. Ethan had a keycard to the server room at my company. He used it to pull some datasets. He used it to grease his rise. I made sure those entries were logged, by timestamp, by IP, by the physical card he swiped. All it took was one subtle nudge in IT to retain certain records that compared his activity to confidential fund flows. He thought he'd covered his tracks. He hadn't. Third, money. A transfer here, a mysterious consulting fee there, payments routed through shell companies. I hired a forensic accountant on retainer, someone patient and hungry. He found the links, traced the snake. Where they expected to find plausible business expenses, he found reckless theft. Not of millions, yet, but of clear misplaced funds that would look ugly to any ethical board, particularly one I controlled. And fourth, the human element, offers. They both had friends, people who would take the safer road when faced with evidence. I did not threaten. I negotiated. I bought loyalty at reasonable prices and traded kindnesses where necessary. Those quiet calls you heard from unknown numbers. Those were me, gently reminding partners of favors and deadlines. Loyalty is a currency, as malleable as gold. When I turned the laptop toward them and played a short clip, Ethan at his desk, drafting an email titled, Loan Arrangements, I watched the room contract. Emily's hand flew to her mouth. Ethan's jaw worked. The clip was edited with precision, no room for plausible misunderstandings. The tone was businesslike, the text clinical, the signatures unmistakable. The recording didn't scream. It whispered guilt. Ethan tried to stand. I didn't stop him. He walked toward the door like a man making a graceful exit from a stage, but I had already expected that. The house phones I'd left connected still routed through a line that alerted a close associate. The moment he crossed the threshold, a uniformed pair were at the gate, and then the kitchen door. They were courteous and efficient. I'd arranged for a private investigator to hand a summarized file to the right officers at the right precinct an hour before dinner. The pieces fell in order. The optics had to be clean. "James," Ethan said, voice small. "You can't, this isn't a... It's everything." I corrected. "It's the truth." The officers moved like they'd done this before. I watched Emily's face as they read her the allegations I had already organized into neat paragraphs. Embezzlement. Conspiracy. Misuse of company funds. A cascade of charges that would ruin a career overnight. Not murder. Not something the tabloids would have to bleep for. But ruin is ruin, colder and more penetrating. They cuffed Ethan with the practiced sadness of men whose jobs asked them to remove dignity. He looked at me and saw the betrayal I had always carried like a patient animal. He mouthed a question, why? But even in that breath, the question was a child's. He had been a child in a man's office, hungry, entitled, foolish. They asked Emily to remain. She didn't resist. She sat like a woman who had been allowed to wear her mask until the lights were finally turned on. I let the officers finish their paperwork in my dining room. In the ridiculous mundanity of it, the plates still smelled of rosemary lamb. The candles hissed in the wax as if they were whispering the end of a story. That night, of course, the narrative outside my walls would be simpler. A scandal. A young executive arrested in a white-collar case. A wealthy wife entangled by association. They'd say a tragic lapse in judgment. They'd say that love and ambition make poor companions. Some would pity. Some would point. But the public's pronouncement wasn't the point. The point was precise ruin, legal, financial, reputational. I had done them a favor. I had made sure the company's internal auditors saw what I wanted them to see, that the regulatory body received an anonymous tip accompanied by the files I'd curated, that the partner who had threatened to go public about certain marital irregularities instead went to my side because I offered a version of the truth that made him look informed, not complicit. I was playing chess. They, sadly, had been playing checkers. After the officers left with Ethan, escorted gently out the same doors where he had once received accolades, Emily finally rose. She moved toward me, not like a wife but like a refugee approaching a general. "James," she said. Her voice had an edge now, equal parts hurt and anger. Why? Why ruin him? Why involve the police? We could have fixed this. We could have left. We could have. You could have told me," I said. "You could have come to me. You would have." She stopped herself. It's hard to keep the script rehearsed in the presence of a man who refuses to play the expected role. "You would have killed him." "I would have asked questions," I corrected. "I would have found out why. I would have tried to save what you supposedly wanted to save." Her laugh was a short, terrible sound. "Save? You saved your pride, James. You saved yourself?" I tilted my head. Pride is not a thing one saves, it is a thing one bankrupts. But her accusation grazed me. No matter how carefully I'd planned, a human will always try to interpret the architect's motives in the simplest, most selfish way. "Let me tell you what I saved," I said, softer than before. "I saved the truth. I saved myself from a life built on a lie. I gave you the chance to walk away before the house of cards collapsed." "You're a monster," she said. "And you're a liar," I said. "We are a good match, then." She left the dining room and went upstairs. I followed, not because I had to, but because I wanted to watch her gather what dignity she could for the night. In the privacy of our bedroom she looked at me like the stranger she was finally allowed to see, eyes rimmed with red, hair in disarray, the expensive dress bedraggled by the shaking of her hands. "You could have spoken," she whispered. "You could have told me you knew." "I did tell you," I answered. "I told you that I'd prepared our final dinner." "You said it as a joke," she said. "It was not a joke when I said it. It was a plan." "You think I wanted to humiliate you?" I asked. The truth is complicated. It is never purely spite or purely justice. It is both. I wanted truth. The humiliation is the collateral. She drew herself up. "You would destroy a man for loving me. For choosing me. He didn't love you, Emily. He wanted leverage, and he found you. There's a difference." I thought of the messages, of the words between them that had felt like currency. Love is a messy thing. Greed is a cleaner, colder machine. In the days that followed, the machine I'd set in motion hummed. The board convened. The press sniffed. Ethan's name became an article. I arranged for a statement, short, measured, no theatrical flourish. The company released it, and the board voted to place Ethan on administrative leave pending an investigation. I had handed the board the proper evidence in the proper form, clean, with a paper trail that made it impossible to bury without calling the regulators. His reputation evaporated overnight. Emily's ruin took a different shape. She became the footnote in a business scandal, the woman who sang like a siren in corridors where men who wanted power listened too eagerly. Her social calendar emptied. Friends took distance. The charity where she'd been a rising star accepted her resignation, with regret, citing the distraction. The houses that once opened their doors now provided charity for causes distantly removed from scandal. I watched her be unmade in small, precise increments. I watched the way those who had once smiled at her left the room, the way invitations stopped arriving, like leaves falling from a tree that had finally been pruned. All this, I realize, sounds monstrous. Perhaps it is. I will not pretend a saint's cloak covers my shoulders. Yet I remind myself that Eli had stolen from the company that I had built in sweat, from the communities we supported, from the people who trusted me as a steward. Emily had stolen the simplest thing of all, a life we had promised each other. If ruin is a brutal currency, consider me the banker calling in the debts. There were small delights in watching human systems, legal, social, financial, respond to truth. It was almost beautiful in its efficiency. Papers were filed. Depositions were arranged. The story widened, and with that widening came a certain inevitability. Once the world decides on a moral interpretation of an event, personal pleas no longer change the arc. And yet, carefully, I kept a small door open. I had not bet everything on the gallows of public opinion. Justice, in my mind, should not be purely punitive. It should be corrective. I could have destroyed them utterly, left them destitute, without recourse, but I had reasons to stop short. One petty reason: I wanted them to understand the architecture of their ruin. Another, more merciful one: I wanted to preserve the last possibility of repentance, if such a thing could exist for them. So I offered Emily one dignity, thin but real. A settlement. No public fight for custody over the minor things we had accumulated together. We had few shared financial dependents. The house, too, could be partitioned. I offered to keep certain communications private in exchange for her silence on matters that would involve other people. I did not demand her life. I demanded her honesty. When she refused, when she threw the offer back at me like a poisoned chalice, I saw a change in her. The woman who had once smiled and planned and plotted now lashed out, indifferent to a ruin she believed could never catch her. I cannot say I felt remorse. I felt only a quiet, smoky vindication. But there is a last scene in this part of my life that I will not forget. A week after the dinner, by arrangement with a journalist I trusted for precision over sensationalism, I sat across the table from Emily in a small cafe that used to be ours. It was raining outside, the kind of rain that seems polite and then lingers. Emily's eyes were clear in a new way, not because she'd been absolved, but because some weight had finally been placed upon her shoulders. "You could have come to me," she said again. You could have told me," I said. "We promised honesty." "I lied," she admitted. "I lied because I was ashamed. Because I was greedy. Because I wanted to believe I could have both of my lives." Her voice quavered in a way that scraped at something inside me. And now, she said, "I have nothing I recognize. And you have everything. Is that what you wanted?" I looked at her. I wanted many things, some base, some noble. But I was not cruel without cause. "I wanted the truth," I said. "And I wanted to reclaim my life." She laughed then, thin, high, exhausted. "At what cost?" "At this cost," I said. "At the cost of justice. At the cost of truth." I paused. "At the cost of learning who I am when I refuse to be lied to." Outside, rain threaded the glass. Inside, the cafe felt like a theater where we had both been given our lines and forced to improvise. She stood. She left without looking back. The next morning she would sign a few documents. The media would file a corrected piece that softened her image. A few charities would distance themselves more bluntly. The machine moved along its inexorable rails. And yet, even with all this momentum, there is a hunger left. It is a hunger that is not only for retribution but for closure, the kind that is clean, almost surgical. For all the legal ruin I had arranged, I wanted a final moment where everything was known, where no whisper could twist the record. That is what the third part of our story is for, the final dinner, the title of which is no longer a threat but an inevitability. The trap had closed on Ethan. The social net had tightened around Emily. The board had been informed. The press had been fed. Yet one small piece of theater remained, an ending for which I had prepared every prop. And if I had taken them to the very edge, I intended to show them the view. The police left at midnight. Their voices faded down the hall, and silence finally returned to the mansion. Only the candles still burned, slow, trembling flames over empty plates. Emily sat across from me, hands shaking. The detectives had already taken Ethan away. Fraud, corporate theft, falsified contracts, every charge tied neatly to his name. He didn't even know that the evidence had been built by his own boss, me. Emily stared at me through tears. James, how long have you known? Long enough, I said. Long enough to stop being your fool. She tried to reach for me. You ruined him. No, I whispered. He ruined himself. I just wrote the ending. I handed her a small envelope, divorce papers signed and ready. You'll keep the house, I said. And the memories. They're worth more than money. Her voice broke. Is this really it? It was over the night you chose him. I stood, poured one last glass of wine, and looked out over the lake. The reflection of the candles shimmered like distant fireflies. The air smelled of rosemary and smoke. You know, I said softly, I used to imagine growing old with you. But tonight I realized some promises die before we do. She said nothing. Only quiet sobs answered. I walked to the door, picked up my coat, and paused. Goodbye, Emily. James, please, what will you tell people? The truth, I said. That my wife taught me the cost of blind love, and the taste of cold revenge. I left her there, surrounded by the wreckage of a perfect dinner, a table set for 3, now missing everyone that mattered. Outside, dawn was just breaking. I took a deep breath of the crisp air and felt something I hadn't in months: peace. No blood. No shouting. Just closure. As the sun rose over the lake, I whispered one last line to myself, maybe for my viewers, maybe for the ghosts I was leaving behind. They say revenge is best served cold, but mine was cooked perfectly, at the final dinner. Loudspeaker, if you enjoyed this story and want more powerful, human-narrated thrillers like this, don't forget to subscribe, like, and share. Your support keeps these stories alive. Red Heart.